Morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the IEA's launch of the Energy Efficiency 2020 report. This morning, we will present the findings with Dr. Fatih Birol, our Executive Director, and Brian Motherway, the Head of Energy Efficiency at the IEA. All of the findings, the report, and the analysis are all available for free on our website. This morning's session is being live streamed. We will hear presentation followed by a Q&A. And I would like to request from the journalists that are on our call to please send your questions through the Q&A box in the Zoom application. And with that, I would like to turn the floor to Dr. Birol. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jet. Good morning, good afternoon to all the colleagues who are following this live stream. Today, we are launching one of the most important reports of the International Energy Agency, our Energy Efficiency 2020 Market Report. Many of you know that at the IEA, we look at all fuels and all technologies, but when it comes to energy efficiency for the IEA, it is the first fuel, number one fuel, as we believe it is very critical to address our energy security challenges. It is very important in terms of making energy an affordable commodity, and maybe more importantly, it is a critical option in terms of addressing environmental challenges, climate change, and air pollution. So in our report, every year, we look at the progress made around the world in different countries and different sectors, and highlight some of the trends, whether or not they are in line with our expectations, government's aspirations, and in line with our energy and climate goals. For us, energy efficiency, together with renewables, these two are the two main pillars to address our climate problem: renewables and energy efficiency. Of course, we need other technologies, existing and forthcoming technologies, but these two are critical. Some of you may know that only a few weeks ago, I launched our renewable market report with my colleague, Mr. Hemi Baha. And in that report, we gave rather encouraging news in terms of the 2020 and also in the for the next years to come. And one of the main findings of our renewables report was the renewables, unlike the rest of the energy sector, oil, gas, and coal, we have announced renewables as immune to COVID crisis, because despite the COVID, we have seen improvement, slight improvement in the use of renewables, especially solar and wind. Now, unfortunately, I should say that our energy efficiency report doesn't give us good news. In fact, it gives us rather worrying, deeply worrying news. My colleague, Mr. Brian Motherway, will give you the details of our report, but for me, the key message is that the global progress in energy efficiency in 2020 is the slowest in the last decade, about 1% progress. It is the very disturbing message, especially when we talk about the increasing ambitions from the current ambitions. And we are far from our current ambitions, far behind from our current ambitions. Leave aside increasing those ambitions. Dear colleagues, in the absence of very strongly and rapidly improving our energy efficiency, our chances to reach our energy and climate goals are very slim, if at all existing. And this 1%, only 1% growth is, as I said, the lowest in the last 10 years. And according to our analysis, to reach our climate goals, global energy efficiency need to progress, need to improve at least 3% per year. And we are even only 1/3 of it. So why it is happening? I think there are a few reasons, and Mr. Motherway will tell you about this, but I want to highlight two of them. One, as a result of COVID crisis and its economic financial implications, many households are reluctant to renew their cars, their electrical appliances, through which we would have seen energy efficiency improvement. The same applies to industry sector, and the same applies to other sectors. So the turnover of the energy using equipments are much slower. This is number one. Number two is the low energy prices. In the absence of strong regulations, the level of energy prices, which would normally lead the consumers save energy, is very important, and the lower energy prices as such played here another role for seeing this rather undesired outcome. Now, we are at the IEA, we are well aware that the governments around the world are fighting in two major areas: economic recovery and having the pandemic under control. And many of them are preparing economic recovery plans. And it is the reason we made a sustainable recovery plan focusing on the next 3 years. What kind of energy policies governments can pick up in order to reach three objectives: economic growth, job creation, and reduction of emissions. And among the policies we have chosen and offer the governments, working together with our colleagues from the International Monetary Fund, from IMF, a key policy we have suggested was energy efficiency improvement, especially energy efficiency improvement in the building sector. And we are happy to see that some countries, some European countries, or recently Canada, follow our advice. But when we look at the sustainable recovery packages, we are not very happy that the attention from governments to energy efficiency policies are rather limited. And we hope to see that the next economic recovery packages will benefit from the energy efficiency policies and decisions. Our report shows that the through investing in energy efficiency, through energy efficiency program for buildings, for example, we can create a lot of jobs. Unemployment is a major issue today and will be more important in the next few months to come. And as I say, energy efficiency is a job creating machine. So therefore, our advice to all the governments that they push the energy efficiency in their economic recovery packages, which in turn may help this 1%, this bad result of 1% can be improved. Finally, dear colleagues, at the IEA, we have chosen energy efficiency as the number one fuel, and it is the reason we are working with many governments, from Japan to Denmark, from Indonesia to South Africa, with the decision makers at the government levels on energy efficiency, how to draft legislations, provide incentives for energy efficiency investments on different areas, from refrigerators to buildings, from buildings to household appliances, from household appliances to trucks. And we are very happy to see that many of our advice and sharing best practices among the countries are picked up by governments slowly but surely. But we will follow up these energy efficiency policies around the world very closely, and every year we are publishing the results. Unfortunately, today we are in front of you not with a good result. Once again, very disturbing result of only 1% global energy efficiency improvement, the poorest in the last 10 years. With this, I would like to turn to my colleague, Mr. Brian Motherway, who is the head of our energy efficiency division, otherwise known as the GRU of energy efficiency. Brian?
Thank you very much, Dr. Baral, and thank you for those words of introduction. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's a great pleasure to be able to share these results with you, but of course, it's also, as Dr. Baral has emphasized, not a good news story necessarily for energy efficiency progress in the last year. So let me share some of the key points of the report with you. And as Jad has said, the full report is available on our website, and we encourage you to go there and download the full details where you can find out all of the latest analysis on energy efficiency. The key point being that for the last few years, we've seen slowing progress in energy efficiency, and 2020 has exacerbated that and further weakened progress globally. This is driven by lower levels of investment in energy efficiency in all sectors, and also driven by some structural shifts we have observed in our analysis that are making the economy in certain sectors globally more intensive and less efficient. Of course, 2020 has been a year with very many changes in all of our lives, including our behaviors when it comes to energy use, whether it's in terms of travel or the way we work or the way we connect with other people. And we see these changes, some of which have had positive effects on energy efficiency. But the question is, what will happen to them in coming years when the crisis no longer affects us to the same degree? And what can policymakers do about that if they want to lock in greater levels of energy efficiency? And this is the key question. What are the policy responses that governments should be considering now to set us on a more efficient path? And it's a really crucial moment as we come out of 2020, whether we return to less efficient behaviors and investments, or we lock in a path of greater levels of efficiency and therefore drive the energy system towards lower levels of carbon emissions and more sustainability in the future. And that's why it's such a crucial moment. First of all, in the last few years, we've seen a decline in progress in energy efficiency, particularly as measured in terms of primary energy intensity, which is how much more value we extract from the energy we use every year. We do get a little bit better every year, but the rate of progress has been slowing down. And 2020 is the worst year in a decade in terms of that rate of progress. As Dr. Baral said, This is literally a third of where we see efficiency progress should be, but also could be, because our analysis shows that even just exploiting technologies that are readily available to us all today in terms of more efficient equipment, more efficient building techniques, more efficient industrial processes, we could be improving our energy efficiency at more than 3% a year. And that's the kind of scale that's required to get us back on target regarding our decarbonisation goals globally. So we are not near that at the moment, and responses by societies and governments are required if we are to get back on that path. What's driving this slowdown? Well, of course, the crisis is central. And here in 2020, we see a significant slowdown in investment in energy efficiency. Investment levels have already been flat for some year, which was already a certain concern. But now we see a decline of about 9% in 2020. This is driven by a lack of consumer confidence, a lack of willingness to maybe buy new vehicles, upgrade homes, upgrade appliances, and similar kind of thinking in industry and business sectors where there's a reluctance to invest for very obvious reasons, but of course with energy efficiency impacts. We also see some structural trends in terms of what sectors were most affected in 2020 by the economic impacts of the COVID crisis. We see that certain more intensive sectors were actually less affected because of their roles in the economy. And we see similar effects in commercial sectors where the crisis seems to have hit more efficient sectors because of the nature of their activities rather than less efficient sectors. And that's given us a structural shift towards uh, greater levels of intensity and, of course, has dented efficiency. We saw something similar in the 2009 global financial crisis, and we saw even more so then that the recovery pushed a structural shift towards greater levels of intensity and put a pressure on efficiency then too, and that's something we really would hope to see avoided in the coming years. Why is all of this important? Well, as Dr. Baral stressed, efficiency along with renewables, they're really the two key pillars of decarbonizing the energy system. In fact, efficiency over the next 2 decades is the biggest single source of greenhouse gas abatement from the energy sector if we deliver its full potential. So it has the possibility to be the key driver of decarbonisation of energy systems globally, but only if we achieve its potential, which is not something we are doing today. That's in the medium term in terms of the importance of energy efficiency. But we also look at the short term and we look at the importance of energy efficiency in the IEA's Sustainable Recovery Plan, which is something that emphasizes how governments can align short term goals around economic stimulus and recovery and job creation with the bigger goals of clean energy transitions and decarbonization. And nowhere is that alignment better than in energy efficiency, because energy efficiency activities are jobs intensive. They're about building better buildings, they're about upgrading existing buildings, upgrading industry and commercial facilities, a lot of sectors that employ a lot of people in construction, manufacturing, retail and supply. So there's a great opportunity to align job creation in the very near term with building in much greater levels of efficiency into our infrastructure, into our building stock, and into our energy using equipment. And that is why we are encouraging governments to look at ways to focus on energy efficiency, among other key sectors, in their sustainable recovery plans and in their economic stimulus activities. Now, we do see some positive activity in this space. We see in the last few months about 70 billion US dollars equivalent assigned to energy efficiency related stimulus activities, particularly in the building sector, other sectors as well, including transport, but not all sectors and not all parts of the world. A vast majority of those financial announcements are here in Europe. We see some other examples in Asia, the Americas, most recently in Canada, but we see lots of space as well for a further emphasis on energy efficiency. And we encourage governments to consider how energy efficiency can be part of their economic stimulus activities and their spending announcements. In particular, the IEA's Sustainable Recovery Plan shows how many jobs can be created through economic stimulus in energy efficiency. The announcements to date that I've just mentioned, we think could create up to about 2 million jobs over the next 3 years. That's 2 million jobs recurring in the next 3 years, which is a substantial positive impact. But according to the IEA's analysis, we could triple that by a stronger emphasis on financial support, but also policy support in relation to stimulus and energy efficiency. So huge opportunities remain for further degrees of economic stimulus and job creation through energy efficiency. So we are at a crucial moment in terms of policymakers' decisions on energy efficiency. In particular, I think we can expect from 2021, we are going to see greater levels of economic growth return, where we can expect more building to occur, more purchase of appliances, of vehicles, of industrial equipment to occur. And the question is whether all of that activity will lock in inefficiency for the coming decades or lock in efficiency for the coming decades. And that choice lies in the hands of us all. To take an example, with the return to building we expect globally, if buildings are built at their current level of inefficiency globally, that will lock in very significant additional amounts of future energy demand and emissions that can be avoided by moving quickly to best practice in how we build buildings around the world. And we can see the difference in just the next decade could be the equivalent of eliminating the total heating demand of 80 million homes if we just act now to make sure everything we build from now on is at best practice levels of efficiency rather than the levels we see in many parts of the world today. It's a crucial policy opportunity for governments to move quickly to make sure that the build back is on the right path towards greater levels of efficiency and decarbonisation. Similar decisions face us all in our behaviors. We know from our analysis that many behaviors can be really instrumental in changing the future path of energy demand and emissions. And these include many behaviors that we've seen already change quite radically in 2020, driven by the crisis. So we see that key issues such as substituting online meetings such as this instead of business flights, substituting active modes of travel such as cycling and walking for car driving, and other measures related to that, all of which have become much more prevalent in 2020. If those behaviors sustain over the coming decades, the impact on total emissions from the energy system could be really very significant. And this, of course, is something that's of interest to many governments around the world. And the question, of course, is will the behavior changes we have seen in 2020 sustain themselves beyond this year of crisis? We don't know for sure yet, of course. These are unprecedented times, but there are some pieces of evidence that indicate that it's not a simple matter of letting these behaviors rest and they will take care of themselves. One that I think is quite revealing is what happened in stock markets the day of the announcement of the first successful COVID vaccine by Pfizer, where in key shares associated with travel, such as airlines and cruise liners, all saw a bump in their stock levels, whereas key stocks associated with our at-home activities, such as video streaming and Zoom services, which we're using today, all saw a dip. Uh, Not conclusive, but enough to indicate that markets certainly think that a return to old ways of living and behaving and traveling is likely once vaccines become prevalently deployed in the coming months around the world. Equally, opinion surveys seem to suggest that while some people are planning to change their behaviors post 2020, others plan to return or even go beyond their previous levels of activities in relation to things like driving and flying. I want to stress here that in no way are we suggesting that such behaviors are bad or should be in any way constrained. All I want to say is these types of decisions that everybody will make in their daily behaviors have really significant impacts on energy efficiency. And therefore, if governments want to really drive energy efficiency in these sectors, well, they are going to have to take policy actions. There are plenty of policy options available to governments to lock in better behaviors, such as walking and cycling, as we see many cities around the world building better infrastructure, offering financial incentives, and other actions that can be taken if governments want to drive the sustainability and the longevity of these new behaviors. But there's very little evidence to suggest so far that these behaviors of 2020 are going to sustain themselves without these kind of policy actions. So once again, the matters are in the hands of governments to decide how they want to drive the future of energy efficiency. I want to mention one more area that I think is really crucial here in 2020 in relation to the future of energy efficiency, and that's the deployment of digital technologies and enhanced infrastructure for digital technologies that can really change the landscape for energy efficiency. We already see many technologies becoming quite prevalent in terms of smart home technologies, home management systems where we can use our phones, or we have smart meters installed where we can get much better control and optimization of our energy use. And as these become system wide, as they include smart grids, smart balancing of supply and demand in our electricity systems, there's a real opportunity for the way we think about energy efficiency to move from simply minimizing our end use to actually being an active part of overall system flexibility, deployment of variable renewable resources, and maximizing the overall clean energy potential and cost reduction potential in our whole energy system. And this is a topic we are working very intensively on here in the IEA, as we see it as a crucial element and a crucial opportunity for governments and industry and consumers in the coming years to make our energy systems more efficient. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, let me stress again the key points. Energy efficiency is not on track for where it could and should be. We see the lowest level of global progress that we've seen in the last decade. This is driven by lower levels of investment and certain structural trends, and this is concerning because really now what happens as we come out of 2020 is going to be crucial, and the policy decisions and the purchase decisions and the behavior decisions that we all make in the next couple of years are really going to determine the future path of energy efficiency for the next decade and beyond. And it's particularly important to emphasize that the importance of energy efficiency is not just for our clean energy transitions of the future, but it's for job creation, energy system resilience, lowering people's bills today. So there's a real alignment of the short and the long-term benefits of energy efficiency, which puts it in the hands of governments to take the right policy actions that can lock in future levels of energy efficiency for the decades to come. So thank you very much for your attention, and we look forward to discussing these issues further in the Q&A. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your presentation. So we are going to take a very short break, about a 1-minute break, so that you can send us your questions. Again, for the journalists on the call, can you please send your questions through the Q&A box in the Zoom, and I will read them over. And now we will take a 1-minute break. Okay, welcome back. So we're going to take a few questions here that we've received. So all to you, Brian. The first question is, as we've seen a number of strong commitments from governments for net zero targets, what are the implications of the slowdown in efficiency improvements that you've just mentioned?
Thank you. I mean, I think that's a crucial question and one that Dr. Baral spoke to as well, that we see that nobody's clean energy transition, nobody's decarbonization target can be delivered really without energy efficiency, or certainly it would be much more expensive and difficult. Energy efficiency has the potential to lead these transitions in ways that not only reduce the carbon emissions of our energy systems, but also make energy more affordable, make systems more secure, and of course create jobs, as we've emphasized. And therefore, we certainly think the governments will need to put a much stronger focus on energy efficiency as their targets become stronger. And I can tell you, we're working with many governments around the world already, particularly many of those who have declared these higher levels of ambition, which of course we welcome very much. And we know that they realize that there needs to be a stronger focus on efficiency. So in the negative context of today's results, I see a glimmer of optimism in the sense that we know that many governments are starting to put a stronger focus on thinking about what the next generation of energy efficiency policies are that they might put in place in order to help them drive these higher levels of ambition.
Thank you. Maybe there's a very good follow-up question here that we've received, which is, does the IEA expect a skills gap when encouraging the investment in energy efficiency as part of these recovery plans or job creation plans in the short term?
That's a very good question and an important area, because I do sometimes see governments acting to create markets for, let's say, home retrofit or replacement of technologies, and not necessarily making sure the skills and the workforce and the training is in place to deliver on that. And I always stress that energy efficiency jobs are not just jobs of the future, but the careers of the future, because these emerging sectors like digital technologies, much more optimized industrial sectors, much greater levels of building control, they're very much emerging sectors that have great potential for people to form their careers around. And I do see some countries starting to focus on better training about advanced building techniques, advanced control systems, advanced optimization of buildings. And I would certainly say that it's a point well made that as governments think about scaling up these sectors and having much higher levels of efficiency activity, they need to make sure the skills and the workforces are ready.
So there's another very handy follow-up question. Given the fact that efficiency is so critical on many different fronts, and that it is also a job-creating machine, why aren't government doing more on efficiency?
We see that many governments are very interested in energy efficiency, but find it difficult to really implement and deliver. And that's the nature of energy efficiency. It's cuts across all departments of government. Whether you're trying to if you're trying to improve the building stock, you it's not just an energy policy matter, but it's a building stock matter, infrastructure, skills, fiscal instruments. So it really requires a whole of government focus and prioritization. And it's interesting, just recently our director Dr. Baral convened a panel of leading thinkers from around the world called the Global Commission for Urgent Action on Energy Efficiency, which was led by the Prime Minister of Ireland and included energy ministers from many countries, as well as CEOs and think tank leaders. And their focus on urgent action really stressed that if governments want to move faster and deeper on energy efficiency, it needs to have that whole of government, whole of society engagement, which it hasn't necessarily had yet. So we have learned a lot from the successes around the world and from the failures. And we now here in the IEA are working with governments to really deploy that best practice thinking to see how they can make faster and stronger progress on efficiency.
Thank you, Brian. I'd like to note that the report from this global commission that you mentioned is online on our website. Is available for free, as well as the recent report the report we've just published this morning. Obviously, you mentioned here in the presentation consumer behaviors and changes in consumer behavior. The question here is, what kind of actions can governments take to encourage such changes?
So I think many governments are realizing that behavior and behavior change is a central part of the future of clean energy and energy efficiency in particular. And I think 2020 has really just brought that message home to people when we see how radical the changes of 2020 were, not for pleasant reasons, and of course the energy implications of those. And a question on the lips of many governments now is, what can we do to see how behavior can help energy efficiency goals? And again, as I stressed earlier, this is not to say that certain behaviors are good or bad, but it's clear that behavioral choices have a significant impact on energy and energy efficiency, and therefore the question is relevant in terms of helping governments deploy efficiency. We've learned a lot from governments around the world using more advanced behavioral insights and more sophisticated techniques driven by the findings of social science in particular, as to how to engage with consumers, whether in their homes or in their workplaces or with business decision makers. And in fact, to add to our report list, just earlier this week, we published a new report, which I can tweet out a link to after this meeting, where we pooled the best practice from around the world on behavioral interventions driven by governments to change energy use relating behavior. And I think that's a real pool of knowledge now for governments to start to use to put a stronger emphasis on the role of behavior change as they evolve their energy policies.
Okay, thank you very much, Brian. So in the interest of time, I will request the journalists just email us questions at press@iea.org if you have remaining questions. I'd like to thank you, Brian, for the presentation. Again, this is a topic that the IEA is going to be spending a significant amount of time, as it has throughout the years next year, given the importance of efficiency. So again, thank you for your attention to this live stream. Thank you.